So on to reviewing the existing documentation. On the website, if you go to the API documentation here, you're provided this. This is almost 3 years old now, so it's a little bit older of documentation, though this hasn't really been updated in 3 years. So there are limitations to the API, which we're going to find out as we go through, but we need to read through the documentation to understand what it is that we're actually after, what are the capabilities of this API, what are the limitations, and how can we maybe improve upon that? Or what is the data that is produced and how can we use that? So we want to know how to manipulate the data, how to pull it, and then what we can do with it. So here it gives us the introduction to the API. It says, hey, you're able to use search operators here, which I have that documentation open as well. But your API key is required in all lowercase. Also, you have to have a valid dehashed subscription. Again, do not worry unless you want to build this out line by line with me. You're welcome to, but you don't have to. You don't have to worry about buying the subscription. Okay, this is all a methodology course. You don't have to actually follow along if you don't want to, but you should be thinking about something in your head. And when we do build the lab environment, we actually start going through all this, you should be thinking about what you want to do. So here, right now, what we're going to do is we're going to come through and just read the documentation. We're going to take some notes maybe. So it's going to tell us a little bit about the firewall. It's using Cloudflare. It's fine. We're going to look at the request limitation. So we don't want to send more than 5 requests per second. Okay. And then, hey, what are the API limits and the defaults? Well, it's going to default to 100 results per call. We can actually get 10,000 results if we want to. Now, a lot of these calls, especially if you're looking at a bigger company like Tesla, for example, you're definitely going to have over 100 results. I shouldn't say definitely, but most likely. And so we probably want to default to 10,000 for a size, but we may want to have the ability to declare a size later on in our program. So we'll talk about that. And hey, how many different records can we pull via pagination? Here we can do 30,000. We have a rate limit again of 5 requests per second, but okay, come through here, it talks about the rate limiting, et cetera, et cetera. How do we authenticate? That's important. What are we using? So we're using basic authentication with our email and our password being our API key. So we'll talk about that. We're going to come through and see, okay, what queries can we run? So we could search on email, we could search on IP address, username, password, hash password, name, and any other data points. So it's going to tell us what the return data is right here. It's going to be all this data. So in theory, we could search on all this data and we may want to note that as well. So I'll take a note of, hey, what's the format that we're going to use? What data can we search on? Because maybe I want to start coming up with different parameters here. So we're going to look at this, and these are going to be arguments, and we're going to use something in Python called argparse, but we'll go through this and say, okay, well, maybe for ID, I want to use a -i. So if I do my tool and I search with my tool, I might do -i for ID, and then I put an ID in. Or for email, I might do -e and then put an email address in, or -i for IP address. We don't know for sure, but we have a decent idea of maybe what we want to do here. Okay, and then we have some results here. So it says, hey, if you're doing it with the get method, you should be using the get method. Anything else will actually result in a 404 error. So it tells us about some of the errors that might return. That's useful information as well. So it's going to show us an example request. So we're going to do a curl request here. Again, we saw this in the last video, but we're going to put our query in. So if we want to search for email, we'd put email here as opposed to username. And we could do test. And then we put our email and our API key, and as well as application JSON here as a header. So we'll come through, we'll get results, and our results will look like this. And we can actually take these sample results and put those into AI, such as ChatGPT, and it will be able to parse through that information as well. We want to know how the data is returned and what possible data can be returned. So you see like, hey, here's a result ID here, here's an email, here's a username, password, etc. Well, we know from right up here that all these different things can be returned. So we need to be looking for those and parsing through those just in case they do come back. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well. Hey, what are the HTTP codes? Okay, so success is going to be a 200. We know that. And hey, if we get a rate limit, we're going to get a 400 error. It's going to tell us here. Unauthorized is 401. So it's giving us all the error codes. Method not allowed is going to be 404. 302 for invalid query. So we could build these error codes into our program, and we should, because if we get an error code back, we want to be able to actually see that. So, okay, hey, if it's a 302, we need to say it's an invalid query, something along those lines. So that's important to know from the documentation as well. Now it's going to tell you also, how can you search? So it's going to say, okay, well, yes, you can query on all different kinds of things here. And so we see the default query that they showed us with test, but we also have different fields that we can search for. Here are the same fields. These are the same as above, but it's going to tell us what the search looks like. So if we want to search where the username contains Dave123, we would just say username Dave123. We can do some or here. So we could say Dave or David. We could put Dave, David like this. We can do exact phrases like John Smith, and we'll take a look at this as well. We also have the ability to use regular expressions, though in my experience, some of the regular expressions came out kind of wonky. So your mileage may vary there. If you come through here, you also have reserved characters. We should note these as well. These characters cannot be used. They need to be escaped, and it's telling us right here. And so if we were to send a reserved character, we need to escape that, or it's not going to interpret it correctly. So it's telling us what characters are reserved. Here's the sizing here. So if we look at this, again, we have up to 10,000 results per call. So if we have 10,000 results per call, we know the default's 100, but we can use this and size parameter in order to define what size we want to use. So in my opinion, if we want to use the maximum calls here, we should just set the default size to 10,000 as opposed to 100, because we're going to miss some results if we do it otherwise. There's no real reason for not doing that, in my opinion, but you have the ability, and we'll build this into the tool to declare the size. We can always set the size smaller if we need to. So coming through here, we see some different examples of what they can do. So here's that default example again that they keep showing us. Here's a default response. Now it's going to show us, hey, if we want to see page 2 of these results, we can just say and page 2. Okay, go through, see a response, and we can see this with page 2 and size of 1. Okay, so you're just going to get one entry. That makes sense. We're also seeing a balance here because we have to pay for our API credits. Not only do we have to pay for dhash, we have to pay per API call. So it's not that expensive. I think it's like 3 or 5 cents per call, but it does add up if you're doing testing over a period of time. So you come through here, and that is the end of the documentation. Not a whole lot coming in here. There's also the search documentation here, and it kind of walks you through, hey, how do I search for this? So how do I search for a domain? You can say domainexample.com. Cool. And you can keep searching in different things. This is really kind of just the same. It shows you a little bit about wildcards and the ability to use like a question mark as a wildcard. So if you're looking for maybe something here where you're not sure if somebody spells their name differently, you could use wildcards there. Interesting way to work around it. And we've done that before, just depending on what you want to do. So we'll look through this and we'll talk about different examples. Again, it talks about maybe even splitting this with regex. Again, I didn't have a great experience with it, but if you come through here, you can see a Jonathan@hotmail.com, but we're not sure how Jonathan spells their name. So this would be the regex to check different ways to spell Jonathan and look for that email address. But this says this one won't work, but it shows you the proper escaping method if you want to actually use it. Here, we're going to keep going down. Regex searches. Okay, specific data origin. You can look for the data collection. I don't ever search this way, but we do build this in just in case. And then, hey, specific fields. And we do search on specific fields, so we'll talk about that as well. But you can search on username, email, all kinds of stuff here. And you can mix the operators. However, there are not the ability to do and searches in this. So you're actually going to just get an or search on this, which is kind of interesting. In the real dhash, like if I came up here and I did a search, I could search on the and operator. Like if I search domain example.com and data is collections, I could search that and narrow something down. If we do this in the API, it's going to actually treat this as an or. So it's going to pull all data from example.com or all data from collections. So it's not going to narrow that down. So keep that in mind as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't build it in all that great. So we have this information in mind. Now we need to think about what our solution's going to look like and how we're actually going to go through with this. So we'll talk about that in the next video, and we'll just meet over there and kind of talk about our solution. So I'll see you over in the next video.